everyone, my name is Felicia Bacon and I just passed one of the hardest assessments at launch school, the Computational Thinking and Problem Solving interview in JavaScript. And I'm so excited because now I'm in course JS 225, learning object-oriented programming, and I'm so happy to be learning something new again. I want to tell you guys about my experience in hopes that it would help someone else. Interviews at launch school and in general are no joke, and without consistent and good practice, they can get out of hand very quickly. Whether or not you're at launch school, interviews are something that we all have to face in order to get the job or career that we're applying for. So it's important to be good at this skill. I'd rather find out now in my educational phase that I'm bad at interviewing instead of when I'm actually interviewing for the job and asking for money. In my previous launch school interviews, I really struggled with a lot of different things that led me to not really perform well, like stress and time management and my nerves and things like that. All of these things combined just made it so much harder for me than it needed to be. I'll show you guys an example of a problem that I did with another student a while ago while I was preparing for this interview, just to give you an idea of how the interview looked and what the interviewers were looking for. I won't go into detail of every step of the way, but just show the general outline of what I always do for PDAC and what I was supposed to do for this interview. Time management was probably the thing I struggled with the most in this interview, and I want to tell you guys about my experience because I want to help other people who maybe are struggling with interviews also, and specifically in this aspect of trying to do things in the right amount of time. This time around, in this interview, I think I did a lot better than my previous interviews. My first Ruby 109 interview was a disaster, I think. I did not do well, so it took a while for me to get past that course and to get a little better, but I think I did much better this time. I was much more confident, I was more calm. I really stuck to my PDAC process, and that's probably the thing I'm most proud of. I always stuck to it, even when I knew I was running out of time.
So this is a problem that I was given when I was studying with another student preparing for this interview. And as you can see, the problem description is really short. This is my PDAC process. So I basically look at the inputs and the outputs, and I get that from reading this problem description. And then I move on to the rules. And this just basically tells me, obviously, the rules and requirements of the problem, things I need to look out for, and this is where I figure out all of my edge cases. So as I'm coming up with all the rules, I come down to the test cases. So this looks like a lot, and it is. And when I was given this problem, there weren't that many. I think there were just a few, but the rest of these I came up with. The interviewer, whoever gave this problem to me, had test cases of their own to throw in here too, to see if my solution could pass theirs. And so, yes, these are a lot of test cases, and this takes a lot of time to come up with and write it out. This doesn't mean that every interview will always have this many. It just depends on the problem. There are some things that won't apply to the specific problem that you have. But in this problem, there was a lot that I could test for, so that's why there's so many test cases here. So after I'm done with the rules, I look at the data structures to figure out what kind of data I'm dealing with, whether it's arrays, objects, numbers, strings, things like that. Then here I write my algorithm. So my algorithm is basically my step-by-step process of how I want to solve the problem. And so as I'm writing my algorithm, I'm looking back at my rules, and this tells me what I need to take care of. So usually I kind of take care of like emptiness and things that could be like guard clauses, and so following my rules, I write that in my algorithm. And if you look down at my code, I write my code according to my algorithm. Having this step written down makes this so much easier because I basically just follow this line by line, and this just basically writes itself. So it makes it so much easier for me to have this already done. So this whole process, from reading the problem to doing all of this, coding and getting the solution, should take about 40 minutes.
So this interview requires that you solve a coding challenge in 40 minutes in front of an interviewer. This differs from the previous interviews, at least in my experience for Ruby 109, where you were given 2 problems and you had an hour to solve them. So it might not seem like 40 minutes is a big deal. It seems like a long time to solve a problem, but actually you'll need all the time there is because there's a lot more to this than, say, the previous interviews where you just had to get to a solution while using PDAC. The PDAC was more stressed in this one, and it was important for this interview to find all of the examples and test cases for the problem description. So they really wanted you to explore that aspect of the PDAC process. Here, we're given a problem and we have to analyze the problem, read the problem description, analyze the inputs and outputs, create examples and test cases, and come up with a working algorithm before we even write the code to solve the problem. I started off well. I read the problem, and I think I read it another time, and then I immediately went to my PDAC process, like how I had done 100 times before. So by this point, it was a routine. I started with the inputs and outputs, and this seems like a step that could be skipped. I mean, it seems very obvious because you could just look at the problem description and look at the examples and kind of just see, okay, this is the data that's coming in. This is what I'm supposed to return. But it's really important for me at least to write it down because somehow I'll just forget or overlook it. And that's exactly what happened to me. For whatever reason, that's just beyond me. I somehow misunderstood some of the outputs for certain examples. And I know it was very obvious from the beginning, but because of all the stress I was under, I just overlooked it. I don't really know what happened, or maybe I just forgot. But in any case, I thought I had it down. So I went next to the examples and test cases and try to come up with as much as I possibly could. And it's hard in these types of situations because you never really know when you've gotten all the examples and test cases. There could be a countless number of them, and you kind of have to have a balance here. You don't want to spend forever coming up with examples and test cases, but you want to make sure that you cover the most important ones. So it's hard to tell when you found them all. And obviously you can't ask the interviewer, they can't really tell you that. So you just have to know when to move on from this point. I did end up finding all of them, but still, I think I hung around this part a little too long, and I made another mistake because I was asking questions that I had already had answered. So I was kind of going in circles in some parts, which again, I don't know why or how I did this, but I did. So that cost me some time. And this is the most frustrating thing to me because I had spent so many months practicing for this interview, maybe 4 to 5 months. And it's just crazy to me that even with all that practice, I was still under so much stress and my brain was trying to figure out all these things at the same time. And it's crazy now because I look back and it's so obvious what was going on with the problem. Like I could probably come up with a solution in a matter of a few minutes. But in the interview, it just seemed like nothing was that clear. So that's something I need to work on and I will get better at. But anyway, these little mistakes that I made ended up creating a bigger problem for me when I got to the algorithm because my understandings were wrong about the problem. So I ended up writing an algorithm that solved the wrong problem. And I found out when I ran the code and the output wasn't what I wanted it to be. It was wrong. Well, the values are right, it's just that the data structures are wrong. And this was leading back to the output that I was dealing with earlier in the examples and test cases. So it all just kind of snowballed into something that I just didn't have time to fix in the end. I just ran out of time, and it's very frustrating. But despite the mistakes that I made and those areas that I did poorly in, I actually did a lot of things that I was very proud of. One of those was sticking to my PDAC process the entire time. Even when I knew that I was running out of time, I still stuck to that process. So in the interview, when I ran the code and the output wasn't what I wanted it to be, instead of trying to fix the code itself, hacking and slashing to a solution, I went back to the algorithm and I tried to find where the issue was. Because chances are, probably 100% of the time, the solution to the problem is in the PDAC process. You can solve the problem before you write the code. And my problem was my algorithm didn't solve this problem correctly. So I had to go back and fix that before I could fix the code. Because once you have written an algorithm, the code basically writes itself according to the algorithm. So once I could fix the algorithm, I could fix the code, but I just didn't have time. I had already spent too much time going through this whole process and it just wasn't my best work. But I stuck to my PDAC process. I tried to stay as calm as possible. I remember taking a few deep breaths and my interviewer could hear me, and that's kind of embarrassing and I didn't want them to notice that, but they did. So that's something I have to work on for next time. And even when I knew I was running out of time, instead of panicking and freaking out, I just kind of accepted the fact that I didn't do as well as I hoped. And I kind of just let it go. Another mistake that I made was leaning too much on my PDAC process. I know how important it is. This ultimately is what caused me to spend too much time in this interview, is just the fact that I stuck to it too much. I was too cautious, I was too slow going through it because I was afraid of making mistakes. And ironically, by doing that, I did end up making mistakes anyway. At some point, you have to know when it's the time to move on to the next step. Otherwise, if you hang around one step for too long, chances are there will be other steps in the future that need your time and attention but won't get it. And so you'll spend too long here, and by the time you get to the last part, you don't have enough time to do that. So there goes your interview. It's very hard to strike a balance between all of these things, and that's why launch school has these assessments, because it is a very difficult skill to get better at. And I'm so grateful that I have the chance to practice this now when I'm in school, because it'll help me to get better for the real life job interviews after this. So all in all, yes, I was very frustrated with a lot of aspects of this interview, and I knew I could have done better. It was very embarrassing for me to talk about this because I knew I could have done better, and looking back, it was just so obvious what was going on and I just couldn't see it. But at the same time, I'm still very happy for the experience, and I'm actually kind of happy that it happened this way because now I'm in a position to talk about it and hopefully help other students who are probably in the same boat practicing for interviews. Because if you're at launch school, you already know how this all works. But if you're maybe new to launch school and you haven't had an interview yet, it can be very scary and very daunting. So I just want to let you know, if there are any launch school students out there who are maybe new and haven't interviewed, just know that sometimes it's still a struggle. I have been doing this for years now and I'm still having a hard time. So it's not like, oh, I passed one interview and I'm a great interviewer, I'm so good, I'll never fail again. It's not like that. It's something that takes consistent good practice all the time to keep this up. So that's it for this one. I hope you guys liked this video. I just wanted to share my experience with my latest launch school interview and tell you about my struggles in hopes that it will help someone else see that a lot of people struggle with this, and it doesn't matter that I'm in the front end of the curriculum. It's probably the hardest part for me going through launch school is these interviews. So my advice is to consistently practice every day. Find a study partner or a study group, exchange problems, consistently practice. And I would say for the time management part, because this was my biggest struggle, set a timer for 40 minutes. Aim to get the inputs, outputs, and examples done, say around the 20-minute mark. Get the algorithm written from the 20-minute to 30-minute mark, so that leaves you about 10 minutes to code up your solution and debug if you need to, if it's necessary, if you run into errors. If you can do that consistently for enough problems, most likely you're ready. So thanks for watching this video. I hope you guys liked hearing about my experience. I'll have another video coming out about specifically the PDAC process, and each step of the way I'll show you guys a problem, a simple problem from launch school's exercises, and work through the entire PDAC process and kind of explain what each part is and what it's for. Thanks for watching. Bye.